Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a walk through the front lines, and we will start with just a general understanding of what's gone on overnight and early this morning in terms of Russia's offensive from the air. This is, of course, the 31st of October 2022. So it's been a bad last sort of 12 hours or so for the Ukrainians. The Russians have been hitting Ukraine, uh, both with cruise missiles and drones, it seems, as well as actually S-300 surface to air missiles that have a secondary function of being able to be used in ground offensives. Just going back from yesterday, something I didn't announce is that the Mykolaiv region, they're in Ochakiv, supposedly a military training center was hit by a Russian cruise missile, causing some sort of devastation. That's Mykolaiv down here in the south. So that happened yesterday, and since then there's just been attack after attack. So this is what Noel says. Staff reports that 44 out of 50 missiles were shot down. This is the first time, I doubt the numbers are communicated. I don't know what that means. More than 6 missiles have reached their target based on footage. Well, it's actually been some pretty devastating hits that have happened to the energy infrastructure again. And as I've said before, even if the percentage of missiles that are shot down is very good for the Ukrainians, if the Russians are sending that many missiles, then it only takes a few to get through and to cause huge amounts of problems. So, Kyiv, Cherkasy, Kharkiv, loads of areas being hit, hydroelectric dams. So this is two separate impacts in the Dnipropetrovsk region. You can see lots of black smoke there, indicating probably a fuel dump or fuel storage. A hydroelectric power station here in Novodnestrovskaya. And Kremenchuk as well, hydroelectric power plant. This is turning out a very bad morning for Ukraine. A lot of critical infrastructure is hit. Zaporizhzhia arrival impacts in Pavlograd. So that 44 out of 50 is now out of date, I would say. Well, at least it looks like more places been hit than just sort of 6 missiles. As I say, Zaporizhzhia, Pavlograd. Um, and here it says, no, it could be possible that General Staff didn't include the S-300 missiles in this preliminary report. So that sort of 44 out of 50 might not include these S-300s that have also seemed to have caused some problem. We've seen that Kharkiv possibly modified S-300 rockets were used. So it's not looking good on that front for Ukraine, and continues to be a real problem for Ukraine that Russia hit the critical infrastructure, not least the electricity distribution and production. So they've obviously gone back to hitting some production as well. We've heard that Ukraine are now buying in electricity from neighboring countries, Slovakia, I believe. I wonder, Ukraine was an exporter of electricity, right? So if you are buying electricity off Ukraine and Russia comes along and hits Ukraine's electricity distribution and production network, then do you have a right to say back to Russia, hang on, you have affected our electricity. This is our supply of electricity. This is not about the civilians or even it's certainly not about the military of Ukraine. It's more about the civilian infrastructure. And actually, you are hitting our infrastructure as Poland, as Slovakia, as being end consumers. I'm sure someone knows the legality of this in terms of war, but I would be. I know these countries are supporting Ukraine a lot, but this is almost an actual affront directly on these neighboring countries and the EU who are getting electricity from Ukraine. I don't know. Interesting way of seeing that. So the last couple of days have been bad. Other than that, last couple of days have been very bad for Russia in terms of their losses. So yesterday's losses were, as according to the Ukrainians, 950. Today's 620. Those are unsustainably large losses, and might represent the fact that the Russians have both gone on the offensive in certain areas, and that can be costly in urban areas, but also being on the defensive in a number of areas. Okay, so let's start up in the north, northeast in the Kharkiv, going on to Luhansk area. So we have Kupiansk down to Kreminna, Kupiansk, Svatove, Kreminna, and really very little good quality information has come out here. But what we have to remember is if you think of places like Avdiivka and Bakhmut, where the Russians have taken months to take meters, right? Then it's a little surprise that when the Ukrainians are now coming up against these urban settlements, that they don't just fall straight away. Okay, it takes an awful lot of time. What Ukraine are trying to do is make advances to the north and the northwest of Svatove, so Kuzamivka, around this kind of area, to make these moves across the supply roads to cut off the northern supply. So there's a road that comes down here through these settlements, and if Ukraine can cut that road, then they can cut the supply to Svatove. You've got Nizhria Duvanka here that appears to be something of a logistical hub in terms of Svatove, which is itself a logistical hub. That's why they want Svatove. But again, it's cutting off the pieces that allow you to take a larger settlement without that full frontal assault. They don't want to hit Svatove, even though it sits below the height of the surrounding kind of bluff, if you like, around here. So it should be relatively easy to take as a city compared to other cities. But then you need really the Ukrainians want to do encirclements rather than full frontal attacks. So this is why Kovalivka down south and Kuzamivka, if they can encircle from there and take these settlements that sit on the Krasna River and north of Svatove as well. You start taking these, and then Svatove will fall. But again, like I said earlier, each of these towns, it could be an equivalent to an Avdiivka or a Bakhmut. This isn't the lightning fast offensive that we saw, the counteroffensive that we saw through Kharkiv. This is going to be a much slower process, especially now that the Russians have plugged loads of gaps here with boots on the ground and mobilized troops, even if they aren't the best prepared and trained troops there are. This is why Kuzamivka seems to be this area of quite a lot of activity. Indeed, the Ukrainians have said that they have taken this little settlement, Novoselivske, just to the west of Kuzamivka. And I will reflect that in a change in the map later. But other than that, really not a lot has changed on this front. So, ISW, Institute for the Study of War, says Russian Ministry of Defense and Russian sources claimed that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian assaults on Persha, Travneve, Tabaivka, and Berestove. So there's Berestove. And if we go north, they're talking about Persha, Travneve, and Tabaivka. So these attacks out from there or into Persha, Travneve, apparently the Russians say that they have repelled them. Ukrainian sources and geolocated reports indicate that Russian forces destroyed a bridge over the Krasna River in Krasnoyarchensky, and Russian military bloggers accuse the Ukrainian forces of destroying that bridge. Well, this is an interesting development where you have two bridges have been blown up. One just to the north of in the north of Svatove, and one further down south in Krasnoyarchensky. Now, what happens is when the Russians blow up, or when a defensive force blows up a bridge, it is generally seen as, right, we are under the cosh now. This is a last-ditch defensive effort because then we can't get supplies to our own troops, but we need to stop the attacking troops getting to us. So here, the bridge over the Krasna River near the village of Krasnoyarchensky has been blown up. Usually, bridge is undermined or blown up to stall enemy advance. Recently, it was reported the AFU has cut the P66 highway. One of the possible locations was a crossing at Ploschanka, and that's what I said yesterday. And then you have another bridge. This is the railway bridge in Svatove, was reportedly blown up by Russian forces. So if this is happening, fairly close really part of Svatove, if that's happening in Svatove, then this is showing that the Russians are preparing for the Ukrainians to make the final advances. This is Andrew Perpetua's mapping. He shows that the Ukrainians are really trying to get further north of Svatove in order to do that encirclement I was talking about. But again, it's fairly there's a bit of stasis going on here, and this is the attack towards Chervona Popivka. So Chervona Popivka is where I have again this sort of bridgehead that's been attempted by the Ukrainians. Not a lot of news other than there is fighting continuing around there and towards Livka, and that they are getting pretty close to Kremina. But no massive amounts of detail outside of that. Okay, let's move further. Oh no, one thing to also say is around Svatova, and I talked about these before. There have been these MLRS rockets fired, cluster rockets that release a load of mines, and these are these mines. So around the Svatova area, it looks like Ukraine has been, you know, sending up a load of mining the area, making it very difficult for the Russians to get around. Of course, does this make it difficult for the Ukrainians when they get around? How these mines triggered, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, needs to be. I need to understand more clearly, but I talked about these mines some time ago and about how it's not necessarily about blowing things up because, as you can see, these are fairly obvious. You can see these, but it's about slowing movements down. So if you know these things are around and they're triggered in certain ways, then you need to deal with that, and that can slow you down a day or two in clearing out mines before you can move through a certain area. So that's what the Ukrainians are doing around there. Okay, let's move on further down south. So again, I don't have much information about Bilorivka and what's going on just south of Kremina and around this forested area. So we're going to move down to Bakhmut. And apparently, according to the Ukrainians, so we heard last week that the Ukrainians did a really good job of a counteroffensive and pushing the Russians right back. And so the Russians are now concentrating further south of Bakhmut. Opitne is again sort of there's fighting around there, and in Ivanhrad, just to the west, east of Opitne. But the Ukrainians have said they have actually solidified their defenses around here. So if we see, where are you? Here we go. So these men are from 93rd Brigade. 93rd Brigade have got really good reputation. It's been very good force, and they've done a superb job in defending Bakhmut. They confirm that they pushed the invaders back 2 to 5 kilometers in the vicinity of Bakhmut and entrenched themselves on the recaptured lines. So now they are taking the recaptured sort of what would have been the offensive defensive kind of fortifications of the Russians. The Ukrainians are claiming that they are now using them, and there you go. So if we go from the outskirts here and think, well, there's 2 kilometers, but 2 to 5 kilometers would take you all the way out here. Okay, so they're 2 to 5 kilometers. I would say that this is probably a pretty good idea of where they feel that they are, you know, they are now fairly well dug in. So that's interesting to see that this now seems very much solid, or at least according to the Ukrainians, for Ukraine. So this is why possibly the Russians are trying to get their larger encirclement further down south, as I was talking about yesterday. So that's Bakhmut. Also, you've got Vuhledar up here and Bakhmutsky. So these are just still being hammered at by the Russians. Vuhledar is so one of the towns right on the Donetsk front line. Much more attention has been focused on the bigger and strategically more important Bakhmut. But look at the state of the salt town now. The text says the city disappeared. Remember what it costs to defend every meter. And this is the idea that when we're talking about these towns on the front line, they are just wreckages of settlements quite often. And although that is great defensively, because actually the more they become like this, the easier it is to conceal defenders, and the more difficult it can be to take over such settlements. But flip side is, of course, you are destroying places you want to liberate. it's just I don't know. It just seems fairly. The whole war seems insane. But there you go. So Solidar is not the Solidar it used to be, as many of these towns will testify to. So we move further down south to Avdivka, around uh, or near Donetsk, to the west and northwest of Donetsk. Again, it's all about what's going on south of Avdivka. Opitne, again, another one, and Vodyane are. So what happened the other day? I was saying that Vodyane is under a lot of pressure. The Russians are moving up to mechanized stuff, and they're putting Vodyane under pressure. But Ukrainians say that they have, they've had a bit of a bounce back here, and that they half of Vodyane is under their hands. But that's still, is the writing on the wall for these settlements? Is it just this slow encirclement that'll take place for Avdivka? It's going to be difficult to find out, really. Um, we'll have to wait and see. So that is what's going on there. There's your encirclement. They are trying north of Avdiivka and south of Avdiivka, and the Russians have made some advancements. So, well, let's go now down south a little further to Pavlivka and Vuhledar. So lots going on there. This has been talked about a lot over the last few days. Pavlivka. So according to the latest information I have, this is Defmon. The Russian forces are still fighting in the outskirts of Pavlivka. Uh, Palvivka, and have a huge artillery advantage in the area. So this is certainly true. Pavlivka, I think he's misspelled it. Russia's launched attacks, says Noel, on Vuhledar via Pavlivka. Russian forces reach the outskirts of Pavlivka, and there it stalled. No further gains reported. The Ukrainians have a height advantage from Vuhledar. This is absolutely true. So the Russians claim that they have taken. So if we go further down south, so again, moving to here we are to the Vuhledar area and Pavlivka. So I will move to reflect this. This Ukrainian line is definitely back to Pavlivka now, and Vuhledar is under threat. But the Russians claim that they've taken this. Some of the Russian sources claim they've taken it. Other Russian sources say they only have the half. So it's really going to be around the. I would call it probably this road cutting through the middle of Pavlivka, and Vuhledar is on a bit of an ascent. So this is in Russian, but this is the Ukrainian topographical map. As you can see, there's a slight height advantage. This is Vuhledar, and this is Pavlivka. Pavlivka sits along a bit of a river, by the looks of it, and there is a height advantage here. So actually, the Ukrainians do have an advantage where they're overlooking. I mean, it's a pretty Vuhledar. I mean, this is back in April. The buildings have been absolutely, taken to pieces. But these are great positions for snipers, and for people with RPGs and all sorts, to sit up there and have a pop at those below them. So the Russians have been hitting Vuhledar and Pavlivka with attack helicopters, with jets. Close air support has been hammering this, and they have a massive artillery advantage over this area. At the same time, they've been using loitering munitions to take out Bucks and other sort of air defense systems that the Ukrainians have, in order to allow the Russian close air support even greater security in hammering these places. So it's not looking great for the Ukrainians here, as they are just being pummeled somewhat by the Russians. But it'll be interesting to see whether the Ukrainians bring in some reinforcements. There's word that is happening. You hear a lot of talk about reinforcements in Zaporizhia, and you think, well, this would be a good place to bring them. To be honest, there's talk about how the 93rd. That we just talked about up in Bakhmut might have provided some extra support down for these guys here. Okay, let's move on to Kherson. But just before I do, I've adapted the map, as you can see there. So, Kherson. Right, let's move to the west. We have Kherson over here. Again, not a lot of news at all from what's been happening. I'm just keeping the map the same as I have done for ages. And actually, here's a good indication that not a lot's happened. Here's the deep state map where you can see the time, the changes over time. So this is from the 20th. This is 11 days ago. So oh, that's one day back. So this is the change over the last 11 days. 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th. 26th, bit of a change there where Russians took a little bit. 27th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, until that's where we're at now. So actually, it looks like there's been a bit of a counter by the Russians over in that salient over there, and up north, just no change at all, because nothing is really coming out of there. So the deep state map is looking at this part and saying that it looks like actually this is probably a bit more straight now, and the Russians have had a little counterattack there. I need to look into that myself, but as far as I'm concerned, there's just not a lot of news coming out. Now, there have been the Ukrainians have been hitting the supply big time around here again. There's talk that actually the Russians have been able to resupply over the Novokhovka dam again, which is just, it's this endless cycle of like fixing it up enough to be used, then the Ukrainians finding out and hitting it, and then fixing it up and hitting it, and so that cycle continues. You have got this the footage that was going around. Here it is. So this is a footage. I'll just show you. This is Kherson, and this is Russians under attack by Ukrainian artillery, and just the chaos that ensues. Just have a look around, have a look and see how this happens.
Так, на ПТС, где? Бегом, Иваны! Забирай! Все, ты тоже там танк. Ваш на танк тоже будет. Да? Да. Это я не понял, там нихуя. Давайте, пацаны, ваши на танке тоже уезжают. Все, блядь! Где костер?
See how many people are piled on top of that APC. I'm not the only one who's got concussion. So now they're starting to hear the artillery hit around. Get out, let's go type thing. People in these sort of dugouts. So when we talk about how the lines aren't changing in Kherson, that doesn't mean that stuff isn't happening. Stuff is happening all the time along all the fronts pretty much. But, either information isn't coming out or it's just stuff happening, but actual territory doesn't particularly change hands. Look at all that. I mean, it's just interesting construction. Absolutely hammering it. Swerves one way, tries to correct, swerves again. The entire vehicle. So one would think his concussion is somewhat worse after that. I mean, I don't know, what does this tell you? It tells you that, when you are under direct fire like that, people panic, things get rushed, you get out there quickly, and then mistakes can happen. That didn't look like an organized retreat. That looked like everyone get out of there now. That's Kherson. That again, that bit of footage is doing the rounds. But I don't know, it's just quite interesting. It gives you an idea of what it must feel like on those front lines. And with artillery, it's in the air and you can't see it. It's coming from miles away, so you just don't know when you can get hit. And that lack of knowledge about exactly where your enemy is and when they can hit you just must be quite unnerving and lead to panic. Sure. So this is what the ISW says. A Russian occupation officials stated that Russian forces are preparing to defend Kherson city by engineering defenses in Belozerka and Chornobaivka. That's the airport over here. Ukrainian military official also noted that Russian officials continued to prepare defenses around Kherson city. Ukrainian military officials reported Russian forces are preparing to withdraw artillery units from unspecified areas on the western bank of the Dnipro to possibly reinforce other directions. Ukrainian military officials also reported several hundred Rosgvardia servicemen deployed from the Republic of Chechnya and Kalanchak in the southwestern Kherson Oblast. So someone else saying that 12 HIMARS precision strike munitions targeted barge ferry operations in the bridge span to the M14 highway, the Antonovsky Bridge again. Ukrainian intelligence has noted the arrival of Rosgvardia and engineering personnel into the city. The Russian continues preparations for urban combat. So there you go. That's what's happening in the Kherson area. Anyway, there you go. So not a lot of change, but lots of stuff to talk about. Look for Vuhledar and again around Avdiivka as well. And we wait to see much more information about the northeast and indeed Kherson. Anyway, check out my Ukraine War Update extra video. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you later.